My brother died on a Wednesday, 3 weeks ago. It split what was supposed to be a very typical week for our family in half. Without going into any of the morbid details, let's say Monday and Tuesday represented a thick chunk of wood. Wednesday then throws a chainsaw into the mix, and I'm sure you can imagine the state of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. May as well add every single day up until this point if anybody's still counting. The wounds still haven't healed. In fact, they're still as fresh as the day that they first opened. Mom chose to undergo therapy and grief counseling. Dad started drinking again, and I cried every day for what felt like weeks, but mostly in private. I was offered counseling myself, but I declined it because I just didn't really want to talk about it. About him. I actually have a lot to say about Aid, which was his name by the way. But why should I force myself to open up to somebody who didn't even know him personally? Somebody who probably had a predetermined list of subject matter to discuss with somebody like me. And I bet I can tell you what the checklist says. 17 years old. Check. Male. Check. Dead sibling. Check. Ask him about his relationship with his brother. Talk about the importance of friendship at a time like this. Okay. But I don't have friends because Aid was my only real friend. Ever since we watched Son of Rambo together, he had loved to call us blood brothers. Except we were real blood brothers, genetically bound by the very liquid that courses through our veins. The same veins that he sliced open with a kitchen knife that my mom had gotten a set as a Christmas present. Ironic, isn't it? Christmas was actually when Aid started acting distant. It became obvious because, like most kids his age, Christmas was his favorite holiday. Now don't get me wrong, I could have told you when Aid was on the verge of tears because I had taken the last lemon-flavored ice pop, even if he profusely refused to admit it. But given the time of year, it was just so much more obvious. Brotherly instincts work in mysterious ways, and so when Christmas Eve rolled around, and Aid wasn't running into my room like an ape who had just been released from the Chicago Zoo screaming, "One more sleep, one more sleep," I was naturally very eager to find out why. I talked to Aid that morning in his room. Knocking on his door and hearing his tired little voice even made me more concerned. However, I've always felt a subconscious duty to refrain from being that type of older sibling. The type of older sibling that constantly reminds the younger half that they have childish ritualistic obligations they must follow, until the older sibling finally decides that they no longer have to. So when Aid jarringly looked up at me from his desk with a pen in his hand and his old scrapbook in front of him, his mousy brown curls ferociously looping just above his wide, chummy chestnut-colored eyes, and said that he was fine, I simply believed him. I appreciate that I missed the initial signs that morning. As you can probably imagine, it's something that I will never forgive myself for. Aid turned 13 last year, and I assumed that he had just outgrown the magic of Christmas, that it no longer excited him like it used to. I mean, sure, it was kind of abrupt, but I had no reason to bother him about it. Aid's mood continued throughout the day, and so Christmas Eve proved mostly ordinary and quiet. We watched Home Alone before we ate, which didn't particularly pique my interest because I've seen it more times than I've sneezed. I only really watched it to monitor Aid, and to his credit, he smiled a couple of times. Home Alone was never really one of his favorites, so at the time, this was more than enough to satisfy me. By the time we ate, I started to feel uneasy about Aid's mood again. Dad was nursing his own mood because his annual Christmas Eve booze-up with his coworkers had been canceled. But to her credit, Mom had gone out of her way to prepare what had always been his favorite meal: chicken tenders. I'm talking about the ones from Whole Foods that they tell you to soak in buttermilk on the back of the packaging. Not only could Aid devour about 17 of these in a minute, He usually helped Mom by jumping up onto the counter and individually dripping all of the tenders to such a precise degree that they looked like they had been made in a factory. But there was no such thing this time around. I finally snapped and asked what was up when Aid started fingering his food rather than eating it. It was just too unlike him, and it became clear his mood was rooted deeper than I had initially thought. His reply? Yep. Honestly, I'm fine. I'm just not that hungry. The F word again. The most manipulated word in the English language. Just say it and magically cure all of your problems, all your fears and uncertainties. Or at least make everybody in the room believe that it is. When Aid only managed a few uninspired laughs and I didn't stand up in the middle of the room to sing a single verse from A Nightmare Before Christmas, everybody was naturally very eager to know why. It wasn't that it was his civic duty to perform for us. All we wanted was to know what was bothering him. He refused to tell us that anything was wrong. The majority of times that I tried to ask him after that, he would just pretend he was drawing or writing in his old scrapbook until I left him alone. We never really found out what was wrong with my brother. Now I would love to tell you that he had a tummy bug or a fever and that this story has a happy ending. But you already know that that isn't true. No. Aid's behavior had continued throughout Christmas Day, the day after Christmas Day, and then early 2019 was mostly the same story. I would also love to tell you that I tried to help him, but he did an excellent job of combing over all the unhappy and uncomfortable thoughts that he was battling against daily. Some days he was better. For a few precious hours a day, I felt like I had my brother back, but it was never permanent. It just became his new personality, part of him. Dad said it was probably just puberty or something. Fast forward to today, the day that I'm writing this. My brother is dead and that is permanent, but I can remember him for the person that he was, not the person that he became. That wasn't my brother. I mean the real Aid. The same Aid that would help me build forts out of pillows and played Mario Kart all through the night by my side. The only place I feel comfortable doing this is in the place that he died, at his desk in his bedroom. At first, I couldn't step foot in there, for fear of breaking down in a ball and never getting back up again. But grief leads you in directions that you never thought you could go. It pushes all your boundaries, and in cases like mine, it forced me to go outside of my comfort zone. I've been visiting his room every single day now for the past week. My dad has been putting all his stuff in cardboard boxes, and I've been tipping them over and musing through them every day. Every day unlocks a new memory that we shared. A memory that was previously locked and chained by grief and sadness. Tonight, I found something though. Something that I have never seen before, no way I could possibly be in Aid's possession. By no means a memory that the two of us shared at any time. It was a piece of paper scrunched up at the bottom of one of his boxes, presumably to hide its contents. I don't know. At first, I thought it was completely blank and I almost threw it away because the writing is so incredibly small. The first thing I noticed was the dried up red mark stained in the sides of the paper. It's almost as if Aid was laying on it when he killed himself, or at the very least it was nearby. My parents didn't let me see the aftermath of his death for obvious reason, so there's no way I can know for sure. Like I said, the writing is so small. I had to hold it mere inches away from my face to even see it, but I think I finally have it worked out. The night is long and the days are longer. Footsteps. So many footsteps. Unaware of the torture. I can't bear it. I am so scared. Of the man upstairs. The note is in my pocket now. I don't know why the last line is highlighted. I don't know what the rest of it means and why my brother was seemingly in possession of it when he killed himself. I don't even know if it's his handwriting or not. I have tried to compare it to Aid's homework, but it's just too erratic to know. Anybody could have written it in such a rush. I don't know if it's a suicide note or if it's directly related to his death and how he was acting all that time, or merely just a coincidence. But something about it doesn't sit right with me. My mind hasn't stopped racing since I read it, and it's just about reached top speed as I write this out. I have an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, and my brotherly instincts are telling me that those words mean something significant. Just like those words he'd muttered to me on the morning of Christmas Eve. I'm fine. You weren't fine, Aid, and I'm determined to find out why. It's been a couple of days since I found the note in Aid's room. I have some small updates, but I've really felt myself sinking these past few days. I promise to work harder this week. For those of you that mentioned that I should read through Aid's scrapbook in full, I really wish I could, but I have no idea where it is. He was incredibly protective of that scrapbook until the day that he died, and I haven't the faintest clue where it is now. For the past couple of days, I've searched all over his bedroom, but I've had no luck. Obviously, if I do find it, I'll be sure to read it in its entirety. I also feel like I forgot to mention some important context in my last update as well, so I will add that in the end. A lot of people would probably look at that note and turn their nose up at it, and frankly, I would understand your skepticism. I know that Aid was depressed. That much is obvious by now, and it explains why his mood changed so quickly. It could also explain that the letter was, in fact, some kind of suicide note. His final poem to the world. But what if it wasn't? A day after I found it, I finally plucked up the courage to confront my mom about it. I didn't really know what I expected her to say. Hell, I didn't even expect her to say anything at all. I just wanted to see if she knew what it was or had seen it before. I actually got all the answers I was looking for and more. My mom was the one who had discovered Aid. I had already left for school because I had to present for a science project and my dad had left for work. Aid's illness had taken a toll on both his schoolwork and his health. It was the small thing that hurts the most to watch. And like he would wake up 20 minutes later than usual or having to be reminded to brush his teeth and comb his hair. My mom was no stranger to knocking on Aid's door to wake him up. The sad reality is that we had not become so accustomed to Aid's new regimens. I know for sure that my mom would have knocked on his door earlier than she had. Who knows? Maybe that would have saved his life. That was the morning my mom's life came tumbling down, so I wouldn't dare ask about how she went about it. The only thing I do know about that morning was that I had been minding my own business in homeroom when a small lady with a perm had come up to me saying that I had to go home. There had been a serious emergency. My mom's eyes twitched when I first mentioned the note. The color flushed from her cheeks and her bottom lip started to tremble. Now my mom is a strong woman. Only the very strongest people in this world can lose a young child and live to tell the tale. But the strongest people usually hide the most scars, and it felt like I had just snipped every single one of them open the moment that I mentioned Aid's name. She was quiet for a few seconds before she put on a brave face and said, "Oh, I thought I threw that silly thing away." I asked her why and she said that Dad hated the thought of it. She said that after some discussion, she agrees with him. They think that its very existence represents the darker side of Aid, and the only memories of Aid worth keeping are the happy ones. I could see where my parents were coming from, but if it was a suicide note, it was also the last thing that Aid ever wrote, and the last thing that Aid ever wrote was important to me, no matter what the subject matter may be. I asked her why there was blood on it, though I think she could sense I already knew the answer. I found it tucked under his hand. So a suicide note? No. Why? There was no pen, just the paper with the writing already on it. Maybe he had already prepared it. Maybe. Do you think that it's in his handwriting? It could be. I can't remember the last time he showed me anything of his. That was where I gave up, and I couldn't bear to interrogate my mom any further. I had no right to do so, and as much as I appreciated her answers, it only left me with more questions. I know that the blood is AIDS, that's a given, but I still have no idea if it even is a suicide note, or if he even wrote it and why. The night is long and the days longer. Footsteps, so many footsteps, unaware of the torture. I can't bear it. I am so scared of the man upstairs. Every time I read it, shivers creep up my spine. This is not the template for a standard suicide note. I'm no expert and I know absolutely nothing about suicide notes, and why should I? But I've been scouring the internet and most sites say that suicide notes are for dissipating or creating guilt amongst those who knew the victim, to list the reasons why they did it, or to express thoughts or feelings that they weren't able to convey while they were alive. This note in my hand is nothing of the sort, at least not explicitly. It's just a few lines of text surrounded in mystery and ambiguity. Honestly, does it even look like something a 13-year-old would write? But Aid wanted us to find this note, whether he wrote it or not. It meant something to him, or perhaps he thought it would mean something to us. Either way, it was tucked under his hand for a reason. As of today, I'm making a pact with myself that I will not stop until I find out what my brother's note means. If it turns out to be nothing, then so be it. I don't want to grieve my brother's death for the rest of my life, but the more I think about it, the more questions that I have. I know exactly where I'm going to start. It's been nagging at the back of my head ever since I read the last line, and I probably should have told you this from the beginning. It just all seems so insignificant in relation to the death of my brother. We live in a multi-story apartment complex on the very first floor. There is a total of 6 floors above us. An older man called Mr. Jericho lives in the apartment directly above us. I don't know him very well because he's very quiet and he keeps to himself. What I do know is that he lives by himself, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I refer to him as a loner. My hand is shaking as I write this. The more I think about it, I feel as though I'm hearing footsteps directly above me. Footsteps that I never used to hear. I think I'm going to pay a visit to the man upstairs. Today I left my comfort zone, in both a physical and metaphorical sense. And a few minutes ago, something very strange just flashed up on my phone screen. You won't understand how any of these events link together, and that's completely fine. Let me update you on what happened today. I got back from school at 3:55. My plan was to quickly drop my school stuff next to the door and go straight up to Mr. Jericho's door. That way I wouldn't twiddle my thumbs in my room for hours until I finally convinced myself that I no longer wanted to do it. I'm proud to say that I stuck to my guns, but it didn't really make it any easier. I had never actually gone past the first floor, and looking up at the twisty metal staircase leading all the way to the 6th floor made my stomach churn. As soon as my shoe hit the first step, I felt dizzy and disoriented, like the whole staircase was spinning, rotating and ascending like an old fairground ride. I stood still for a few seconds, attempting to compose myself. I still had the note tucked away in the back pocket of my pants. My parents were still under the pretense that I had discarded it, but that had never even crossed my mind. It had become a coping mechanism, if anything. The staircase area is a very linear but wide open space. Every step made a loud and high-pitched echo that lingered in the air, surrounding the floor above and well beyond. This jangling sound continued to rattle through the building until I finally stepped foot on the 2nd floor. Mr. Jericho's front door is exactly the same as ours, but with a 2 rather than a 1 at its center. I stood outside for a few minutes, silently and subconsciously tapping my foot, rehearsing exactly what I planned to say and do. In reality, I wanted to leave before I even knocked. The only thought stapled to the back of my mind was that I was wasting my time, digging holes that needn't be dug. But I didn't. Perhaps I thought that I was already too deep. I stood and waited, and then the sound of a latch clicking and the door creaking open. Mr. Jericho was a fairly normal-looking old guy by conventional American standards. He's slightly overweight, but by no means obese. He wears these old-fashioned glasses and has a thick mop of light gray hair with a mostly ungroomed face. His eyes are friendly enough, though. He isn't necessarily somebody who would scare a group of children just from looking at him. "Hi, Mr. Jericho. I'm really sorry to disturb you." He looked a little shocked to see me. Obviously, I was an unexpected visitor, but there was a look of immense unease in his eyes as he came to terms with who was standing in front of him. I brushed it off as social anxiety, something I could very much relate to. "Hi. I was just wondering if I could ask you a question." And then he did something odd. He stepped forward and he looked up and down the staircase, almost like he was surveying the scene before he answered. I watched his eyes dart around the staircase building like a hawk following its prey until he finally stepped back. "Do you want to come in?" he finally said. I shook my head. No, I actually just wanted to ask you a question about my brother." That's when Mr. Jericho's body seemed to freeze in time. Not literally, but his jaw locked and he gulped. The sound of the inner mechanisms of his throat was distinct amongst the silence of the building. His muscles appeared to tense, and his limbs started to softly shake. His hand, which was still tightly wrapped around his door handle, started to tremble, and a loud rattling sound rang through the atmosphere, until there was a loud snapping sound that caused me to jolt backwards. I looked back in awe as the man stared back at me, with the broken door handle still in his hand, disconnected from the door that it had once been a part of. I'm so sorry," I whimpered as I tried to find my feet and not accidentally tumble back down the staircase. I didn't know why I was apologizing, but I felt an itchy sensation in my eyes as the man abruptly wiped his forehead, and he slammed the door in my face without uttering a single word. Now, have you ever found yourself feeling lost, scared, shocked, and breathless all at the same time? I found myself in that situation twice in my life. This was the second time. I blinked twice, making sure that I wasn't imagining the scene that I had just witnessed. After a few seconds of subconscious bickering between my brain and my eyes, I found myself accepting the fact that I was looking at the discolored markings where a door handle had once been. I hadn't imagined any of it. Mr. Jericho had turned to stone at the sight of me and torn off his own door handle at the singular mention of my dead brother. The same dead brother who had potentially referenced him in the last thing he ever wrote. Suffice to say, I was almost in tears as I began my descent down the staircase. I still am. Part of me wanted to break down his door and beat him with his own door handle until he told me what the hell that he knew. But I had no cold, hard evidence that he even knew anything about the note, let alone the death of Aid. What I did know when I finally set foot on the comfort of my own floor. A man who knows nothing doesn't run. They also don't break off their own door handles. That happened a couple of hours ago. For the past hour, I found myself glued to my bed, torn between telling my parents or just going to sleep and forgetting about everything that I know. The room feels cold and stuffy at the same time, and the whirling sound of my head is driving me completely insane. My parents' voices are softly vibrating through the walls, and the note is still tucked away deep in my pocket. I can't hear any movement upstairs. A few minutes ago, my phone vibrated. I had received a message request from a new user on Facebook. The user's name is Morgan Jericho. I accepted the request and there was already a message there waiting for me. It reads, "I'm really sorry about how I acted earlier. I actually knew your brother more than you could ever know. Please, can we speak again?" Hi everyone. The last 24 hours have been a bit of a whirlwind. I've had a really busy day searching desperately for something that I still don't know if I even want to find. You know, I thought I knew my brother better than anybody in the whole world, but I'm beginning to think that maybe that wasn't the case. Last night I spoke to Mr. Jericho properly. We spoke about a lot. Way too much information for me to post in one update. So the conversation will be split into 2 separate posts, with this being the first. I apologize for that. The following is copied word for word from a Facebook Messenger conversation with Morgan Jericho. For clarity, my messages are in bold. Mr. Jericho from the 2nd floor? Yes. Hi. Look. First of all, I really would like to apologize about how I behaved when you visited me earlier. I had absolutely no right to act the way that I did. I was just shocked to see you when a whole wave of emotions hit me in the head when you mentioned your brother. I know you won't appreciate hearing this from me, but he meant an awful lot to me. Okay, you're really going to need to slow down because I am seconds away from having a mental breakdown. I need you to be straight and honest with me because what you've told me so far is really scaring me. I need to know how you knew my brother, and I need to know absolutely everything. Honestly, your brother was all that I had left. Cut that shit right now or I'm calling the police. Whatever you're hiding, they will find it and you know it. My brother is dead and now I'm hearing all this crap for the first time. If you leave out absolutely anything, I mean anything, I will find out. So don't you even dare try it. Sorry, I'm just incredibly flustered right now. I'm so sorry that Ade is dead. It hurts me more than you or anybody could imagine. But I'm kind of glad that you came to see me today. I feel like I'm going to explode any day now with everything that I have bottled up. You're speaking gibberish to me, dude. I just want to know everything you know about my brother. Yes, okay, I'm sorry. I just want to warn you now. You're not going to like what I'm about to tell you. I don't care, just say it. Okay. Your brother and I met for the first time in August of last year. Not in real life. I mean, I met him on an online game we both played called Gmod. Okay. Do you know it? I've heard of it, why does that matter? It's not really relevant. I was just wondering if he ever mentioned it, or me to you. He definitely didn't. He never mentioned your name once to me. Well, I didn't stalk your brother or anything if that's what you're getting at. I met him completely by chance. I think some of the servers match you up with people who live close by to you, like geographically. Ade and I were put in the same game one day and we just started chatting. Just a friendly text chat, nothing more. But we started to chat almost every day. Your brother was wise and he had his head screwed on. I can honestly say I was shocked when he eventually told me how old he was. And so you kept talking to a child online, despite them explicitly telling you their age. It's not illegal to talk to a kid on a video game. I'm sorry because you probably don't want to hear this, but we had a lot in common. As I said, Ade was a mature kid for his age. He saw things through the eyes of somebody you could only imagine had seen the world 2 times over. He talked sense and he had the confidence in his own language to support his ideas. This is why I engaged with him in the first place. It had nothing to do with his age. So that's it. You knew my brother through some video game. But it felt like I knew him in real life. So it felt surreal when one day he mentioned how bad the snow was. So deep that his school had been closed for the whole week. It was also snowing heavily outside for me, so I asked where he was from. Nothing malicious, I was just curious. And I understand that it sounds alarming. But I never expected us to even live in the same city, let alone the same goddamn apartment building. Do you know how low the chances are of that ever happening? I've heard of stranger things happening. How often exactly did you and my brother communicate? As strange as it may sound to a young man like yourself, I severely struggle to meet people my own age. I never know what to do or say around them. You need to understand that I've worked from home my whole life. For my entire adult life, I have lacked any form of social interaction that wasn't online. Every relationship I have ever had has been through a computer screen, and it was the closest thing that I had to a real friend. All the other friends seemed insignificant, unimportant in comparison to Aid. And I don't just mean that because he lived beneath me. He understood me more than any of the others ever could. Somehow he just knew all the right things to say. When I spoke to your brother, I didn't feel like a waste of space or a failure. That perhaps there was more to life than finding somebody to have and to hold. That maybe I was making an impact on people's lives through a computer screen, rather than face to face. Jesus, I just don't believe that the two of you were so close and you never met in real life, not even once. Never. We both agreed that it would be weird, but I hardly ever even left my apartment, so it wasn't hard to avoid him. It was obviously bizarre knowing that he was living directly beneath me. One of my closest friends living and breathing underneath the floorboards. But I would never ever betray Aid's trust, with neither words nor actions. I even tried to offer support when he started acting weird. Acting weird? What's that supposed to mean? Yeah. It was around Christmas time. First I noticed that he wasn't coming online as often, but that was to be expected. He was a kid and it was the holidays. I figured he was just spending time with friends and family. I just got on with my life, if I could even call it that. Did he tell you anything? You said that you talked all the time. He must have told you how he was feeling, right? It's how he told me he was feeling that I'm afraid to tell you about. Tell me. Okay. This is probably going to sound crazy, and I don't have any proof or anything of the sort. But there is circumstantial evidence that I can't seem to forget about no matter how hard I try. Circumstantial evidence? What the hell are you talking about? Do you know who Lacey Miller is? Huh. Her name rings a bell. Why? She was that 6-year-old who went missing just a few miles away sometime last December. It was briefly reported in local media, but she was just another missing kid in the center of Chicago, so her story was soon buried by other reports. I followed the case quite closely because honestly, I didn't have anything better to do. Not much usually happens around here, and I guess I was just praying for her safe return. But to this day, that still hasn't happened. She's still missing and her body hasn't turned up. Sorry, but how is this relevant to Aid? Kid, I'm really sorry. What? I think he might have had something to do with it. The following is a continuation of the Facebook Messenger conversation with Morgan Jericho. What do you mean he had something to do with it? He was a 13-year-old kid. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Oh, and what could possibly drive you to that conclusion? There is absolutely no way in hell that my brother, who wouldn't hurt a damn fly, was involved in the disappearance of that little girl. Josh, that is your name, right? Yes. Please read everything that I have to say very carefully. This here is absolutely everything that I know. When Aid and I first met in August of last year, he was exactly as you would expect a kid to act online. Well, I tell a lie. He acted a lot older than his actual age, but he was normal, you know. He was friendly, chatty, helpful. But then when we got closer and I started to tell him about my real-life problems and issues, he actually seemed to care. He offered advice, genuine advice that actually struck a chord with me, and he did that almost every day. I don't have any family to talk or turn to, so when I'm in a bad place, Aid was like a grandson that I never had. But a few months later, he did start to change. I felt like it had happened out of nowhere, but I just happened to notice that it was around the same time that the little girl had disappeared. Now, I understand that this was no reason to accuse him or even begin to think that he was involved somehow. I didn't either. It was just a natural coincidence with a number of perfectly good explanations. Anyway, by this point, Aid hadn't logged in for a few days. We're probably talking a few days after Christmas. The Lacey Miller case was starting to fade out of the media cycle by now, and I had almost forgotten all about it when he finally logged in again. I sent him a greeting message and I went to make some dinner. When I came back, he had left me a single message. I screenshotted it because it made me feel uneasy as soon as I read it. All it said was, "I think I need your help. I messed up real bad." I replied instantly, but he had already logged off. Fast forward a few days and I'm still concerned about Aid's message, but because of our agreement, my only means of contact with him was through the game. I hadn't even begun to make any connections between this message and the missing girl by this point, but I was still somewhat concerned by it. Anyway, he finally logs on again and I messaged him instantly before he could log back off. This is the whole screenshotted conversation from that day. "Aid, finally, is everything okay? Tell me what you needed help with." "I don't know. I don't need your help anymore." "What do you mean you don't know?" "I don't know what to do. I've done something terrible. It was all just a huge mistake. A mistake that will ruin mine and my family's lives." "Aid, you're worrying me. You need to tell me what's happened." "I really want to and I know that I should, but I can't risk it. I can't risk him knowing." "Aid, you're my friend. Whatever it is, we can work it out together. You know that you can trust me." "Who is him?" "The man upstairs." "Aid, what on earth are you talking about? Who's the man upstairs?" "That's what she called him." "Aid, who is she? Please work with me." "And now he knows what I've done. He's not going to forget." "Aid, what have you done?" And then he logged off. The following morning, I wake up to this message. "You know what? You're right, Morgan. I do trust you. I trust you not to tell anybody about what I told you last night. Can you please promise me that?" That was the last time I ever spoke to your brother. I sat and I just stared at my computer screen for hours that night, trying to make sense of what the hell had just happened. That was until I noticed a small notification pop up in the corner of my screen. It was a brief news alert for that Lacey Miller case, reminding the public that the case was still ongoing, and that they were appealing for new witnesses. Josh, I have never been the one to make assumptions, but the realization hit me like a truck traveling at max speed. I, like you, could not comprehend that Aid was involved in some way, but the dots just started to connect in my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It just all seemed too awful to be true. But Aid had started acting strange around the exact time she had gone missing, and now he was telling me all this. Maybe I'm just a conspiracy theorist, but it all just seemed way beyond the realm of coincidence. I don't know what to say. I don't believe you. You're lying. I feel truly, truly awful for only just telling you all of this now. You can't even begin to imagine how close I was to bolting down those stairs and addressing Aid in person. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Or maybe I just didn't believe it could possibly be true. I'm an old man now and Aid was my friend. I know it's wrong that I kept something like this quiet for so long, but until you're put in a position like that, you don't understand how torn you become. It's like a never-ending game of tug-of-war that causes more hurt than physical pain ever could. No. I'm sorry, but no. All of this is just some stupid coincidence, and you're just a lonely old man with a stupid conspiracy theory that holds no weight at all. Aid didn't even know that girl, and he would never hurt anybody. I don't believe a single word that you're telling me. Listen. I still can't be sure that Aid was involved. Nobody can, and perhaps we never will. But we're talking a 6-year-old girl here. Somebody of Aid's build could still easily, well, overpower her if he had the chance. Also, you can't honestly tell me that a 13-year-old with his whole life ahead of him would just kill himself for no reason. He was depressed. He was ill. His head wasn't all there. I was his older brother, I should know. Look, I've said all that I have to say. I just thought you should know what he told me before he died. Do with it what you will. Aid is gone now, but there is no way in hell that I'm getting involved at this point, and neither should you. The cops would have a field day with us hiding this type of evidence we've been keeping. I really need you to just stop for a minute. Just stop talking. I'm sorry. I should go now. Wait, hold on just a sec. What? Before you go, seeing as you think you're so good at explaining things, maybe you can explain what he meant by the man upstairs. He also talked about him in a note he left when he died. Note? What note? I sent him the picture of the note. The man upstairs, huh? Look, I really don't know what to tell you about that. Aid wasn't scared of me, if that's what you're trying to say. The man upstairs can mean a lot of things. Okay, well, if he isn't referring to you, do you have any idea what it could mean? I mean, if we really are going to believe this ridiculous theory that you have, do you think it's related to the Lacey Miller case? I mean, since Aid died, it's something I've been dwelling over for a long time. You being his brother, you knew him far better than I did. Did he happen to be religious? Could the man upstairs possibly be some deity or spirit? That was my initial thought. I don't know, I mean, Aid wasn't religious. At least I didn't think he was. But honestly, I'm starting to think that maybe I don't know my brother at all. If you're asking me, it looks like it could be some kind of plea for forgiveness. I hate myself for thinking this, but maybe Aid couldn't live with what he had become involved with, and with the knowledge that those waiting from above would not see kindly to what he may have done, he confessed his fear in them of sort of an attempt to make peace with himself. Honestly, who knows what was going through his mind at this point. But he was 13 years old. Look, I don't know, I really don't know. I feel sick, I think I need to go. Wait, before you go, I completely forgot. But there was one more thing that he sent me. What? The last time that Aid logged on was a few days before. Well, you know what? This was all that he typed. Writing is good for the soul. All that I have left to say is in a safe place now. Soon, I will be free. I have no idea what it means. Once again, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm looking into something that I shouldn't be. I just had to tell somebody before I exploded. I'm sorry, Josh. I've made a huge mistake not telling anybody about this, but I think I've finally transferred the information to the right person. And now that it's off my chest for good, I think we should just forget about all of this and try to remember Aid for the amazing kid we thought that he was. I don't think that I can, though. How can I possibly forget all of this? You know what, kid? What I knew of your Aid reminded me of my grandfather. He was an incredibly clever man and so loving. Such a big heart. He never once changed until the day that he died. And do you know what the greatest piece of advice he ever gave me was? What? Never go looking for things you don't want to find. If you had told me that I would be leaving my house for something other than school twice in less than a week a few months ago, I would have laughed in your face. But if you would have also told me that I would be searching all day for my dead brother's scrapbook, then trying to trace his footsteps and the whereabouts of a missing girl who lived just over a mile away, I would have snapped your arm off. Chicago is a big city with lots of big buildings and lots of places to lose your bearings in. I tend not to venture out there unless there's a critical emergency. This was one of those emergencies. Speaking to Mr. Jericho felt like I had temporarily entered another universe. We were talking about Aid, my brother. but not the Aid that I'd grown up alongside. We were talking about another version of Aid from a place that should never be crossed over with this world. But somehow, Mr. Jericho seemed to be speaking sense. As incredible as it sounded, and as much as I couldn't bear to believe it, what he had told me seemed to add up. I like to think that I'm a reasonable person. I know when I'm in denial, but even when I am, I'm willing to give the other side of the story a chance. Or maybe I wasn't. Maybe it was just fate or a glimpse of hope that soon, all of this would be all over. Whatever it was, I still couldn't believe what I was doing when I left school and I didn't head towards home. I walked in the opposite direction until I dropped the last of my spare change into the kind-looking bus driver's hand, and I took a seat at the back of the vehicle. I had nowhere else to go, so I figured all I could do was follow the breadcrumbs until they inevitably vanished. I had to keep looking. The journey to Lacey Miller's house was scarily short, only a mile or so away. As the bus rolled through the city, I felt as if the buildings on both sides were slowly closing in. They crept nearer and nearer as I stared at my phone's GPS and thought about how just close we lived to Lacey Miller. Just how close Aid lived to her. The bus stopped near the old movie theater that we had visited numerous times as a family. It took all but 2 minutes to walk to the house where Lacey had once lived with her parents. It hadn't been hard to find her address online because it had been the last place that she was seen alive. The bungalow stood in front of me was old and not very pretty to look at. The bricks were probably white once upon a time, but had turned a light gray color since then. There was ivy hanging from the roof, and weeds protruding from the footpath leading towards the door. The curtains were still drawn, despite it being late afternoon, and the window panes were sprinkled in dust and cobwebs. I knocked. I didn't even think about it or what I was going to say. I was just going to speak and speak until I ran out of breath. It didn't really matter what came out of my own mouth, if it meant that I could find out anything linking Lacey's disappearance to my brother. It was a long shot. Hell, I couldn't even comprehend that I was even considering it. But I was in far too deep to leave it be. After 30 seconds, a latch clicked, followed by 2 further clicks and clangs, and the door gradually opened inwards. Half of a woman's face stared back at me, squinting at the natural lights of the bustling city a few blocks behind me. "What?" she grunted. "Hello," I muttered, twisting my foot through the dirt that caked the footpath below. "What do you want?" She scowled with a little more conviction. "I'm trying to sleep." I nodded and tried desperately to reorganize my thoughts. "Yes, I'm sorry. Are you Lacey Miller's mom?" The one eye that was showing got thinner and the right half of her nose wrinkled. "Who the hell are you?" I gulped. Everything that Mr. Jericho had warned me about. Everything he had told me to keep quiet about and take to my deathbed was simmering on the tip of my tongue. What he called circumstantial evidence was about to ooze out of me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to just come at you like this, but your daughter, I think my brother might have known what happened to her." "What? Who the hell are you?" She scowled. Her grip tightened around the doorframe. "My name is Josh. I had a little brother called Aid. Regrettably, I have something to suggest that he might have had something to do with her disappearance." As I spoke, I felt the front pocket of my backpack. The printed copies of the screenshotted conversation between Aid and Mr. Jericho rustled as my hand made contact. The woman pulled the door back slowly, revealing her entire face for the first time. Now that her face was highlighted by the natural light, you could see how sunken her eyes were and how her hair twisted and knotted in such a way to suggest that it hadn't been washed in weeks. She put her hand up to her eyes to shield them from the sun. "Did you say Aid?" "Aid." It looked as though her brain was working overtime as I considered how to reply. Yes, I replied, as I felt my legs starting to shake and my heart beginning to beat faster beneath my shirt. You didn't know him, did you? The wind whistled behind me and a car alarm sounded in the distance before she finally spoke again. Okay, and you say he knows what happened to my Lacey? I shook my head. I don't know, maybe. I think so. Could I come in? She put two thin fingers to her head and her body started to shake softly. Can't you just tell me here? She said softly. There's just a lot I need to say, and you might want to sit down, I said hoarsely. The grin she pulled as she stared back at me confirmed my assumption that she was on something. Something hard and hallucinogenic. Where do you know that name from? She said, again trying to work around my request. What name? AIDS? I said quietly. There was sudden and distinct fear in my voice. It didn't even sound like my own anymore. You think Aid had something to do with my dear Lacey going missing, do you? The woman said abruptly. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I've got these screenshots. Stop! She yelled, cutting me off mid-sentence before she lowered her tone again. You're sure his name is Aid? Yes, I'm sure. Okay, come in, quick. The inside of the house was in no better condition than the exterior had suggested. The carpets and walls were stained in multiple places, and the small table at the center of the small room I found myself in was littered with food packets and cigarette butts. The room itself was smoky and I found myself inadvertently coughing as the lady left me standing on my own. She returned a few seconds later with a dusty-looking photograph. She brushed it down with her sleeve and let the dust particles fall to the floor before passing it to me. I stared at the photograph, which seemed to be a class photo of what the title at the top suggested was some sort of drama club taken a year ago. As soon as I read the writing, I could feel goosebumps creeping up the back of my neck as I came to the realization Aid had attended the exact same drama club for a number of years. The woman continued to stare at me with tired, dead eyes. What am I looking at exactly? I said, desperately running my mind to think of other reasons as to why Lacey Miller's mother would have a class photo of Aid's drama club in her possession. Front row on the far left, she murmured. It was like the position had been stamped into her memory. I diverted my attention to the front row and my heart sank in an instant. Lacey Miller's face stared back at me with two bright blue eyes and golden pigtails drooped across the front of her red and white summer dress. Although probably younger, you could have known it was her based on the photos used in the scarce amount of news reports that had been reported in her disappearance. It's Lacey, I said breathlessly. The woman closed her eyes and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but a smile nonetheless. Now look at the name at the bottom there, she croaked, pointing at the names of those present in the photo. My eyes darted from the names and then back to the photograph as my worst fears were realized. Standing proudly, just one row behind Lacey Miller was my brother. His hair, his eyes, his entire face squeezed into the same exact image as the girl that Mr. Jericho implicitly claimed he had murdered. I almost refused to believe what I was seeing, but the proof was right there in front of me. Not only from the faces bogging me out from every direction that I looked, but also the names at the bottom of the image. Aid and Lacey Miller. Photographic evidence that they had been in the same drama club, at the same time. I knew I recognized the name. The woman whispered, now inches from my face. This here is my favorite photo of Lacey. Aid was in Lacey's drama club, so you best tell me everything that you know. I sat opposite Lacey Miller's mom for an uncomfortably long amount of time. I told her everything that I knew. From my brother's friendship with the man living in the apartment above me, to his changing behavior both in person and online around the time that Lacey disappeared. And finally, how he had seemingly confessed to something horrible. I even told her about the supposed suicide note. She listened intently, allowing me to speak freely. I couldn't imagine exactly how she was feeling as the words poured out of my mouth, but I couldn't have been far off that feeling myself. The fact that Ade knew Lacey on a personal level had torn me to shreds. Suddenly opportunity, motive and manipulation of trust had come into the equation, and Morgan Jericho's theory seemed a lot more plausible. I just could not bear to think about it as I finally finished telling her everything that I knew when I sunk back into the chair, exhausted with myself. "Please," I stammered. "Please just tell me something. Anything to suggest that this isn't true. The police must be looking for somebody, right? There must be a list of suspects they are looking at or something. Please, please tell me that this is all just a huge coincidence." The woman, whose skin had turned a bright shade of white, sighed. It looked like she wanted to scream, cry and comfort me all at the same time. "How long ago did your brother die?" she stammered, ignoring my question again. She seemed to be in some kind of shock. "About 4 weeks ago now." "Well, that's it then," she said with a chillingly straight face, aimlessly staring at the ground. "If what you're saying is true, then my Lacey has no chance. Your brother killed her, killed himself and left her body to rot somewhere out there. I knew she was gone, but like this? Not like this." "Miss Miller, I know what I've just told you must be hard to hear, and it makes no sense to me either. I still don't accept that my brother was capable of doing something like this. I really don't. I guess I hoped I could come here to find that there were other leads, that this was just some childish nightmare. Please, tell me, do you have anything else? Anything to suggest that my brother wasn't involved?" The woman shook her head, still staring at the ground. It looked like she might be coming back around. "I don't believe it either. My Lacey never saw it coming. One second she's sleeping peacefully in her bed, and the next, somebody is smashing her window, smothering her and disappearing into the night. It was done in seconds. How does a 13-year-old do that?" she said with tears in her eyes. I shook my head with her. "Neither do I. Did she say anything? Anything at all in those days leading up to it?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "She was always complaining about childish, stupid stuff like homework and chores. Sometimes we watched scary movies together, and the morning after she would come running into my room, complaining about the boogeyman on the roof, or something at her window or in her closet, but this happened weeks before she went missing. It was just her childish mind running wild." I hugged Miss Miller. I told her that I'm sorry and I left. Her breath smelled like sour alcohol. She told me very slowly that she would have to turn everything I told her over to the police. I obliged. I'm on the bus home now. It's just me and the driver. The sun has already set and the clouds are starting to turn a dark gray color. I can't stop thinking about something that Miss Miller said just before I left. 5 words that made me feel very uncomfortable, in amongst everything else we had talked about. The boogeyman on the roof. When I got home from my trip to Lacey Miller's home, I was experiencing what I can only call as a sense of dread. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like it before, because believe it or not, my life was pretty good before all of this started. But it was as if everything that had happened leading up to this point in my life no longer mattered, because it was what would happen next that would define me and my family forever. This was our legacy. My younger brother. A murderer? The police were aware of everything now. I had left all of the screenshots with Miss Miller. I didn't know what it took to permit a search warrant, but I figured that any day now they would be coming to our apartment and raiding Ade's room of everything that he had once owned. And the worst part was that I couldn't even blame them. If I was an investigator with no leads and I saw the conversation between himself and Mr. Jericho, I would be Jack Torrancing my brother's door down as we speak. But despite it all, I was still almost laughing to myself as the thought gnawed on the back of my mind. It was still insane, completely and utterly insane. My younger brother, a murderer. I went to sleep that night with my thoughts all over the place. Men upstairs, boogeyman on the roof, missing child, dead brother. My life had become a big horror movie. I woke up late the next morning. The apartment felt as lonely as it always did because Dad was gone to work and Mama sat at the kitchen table on her own. She was normal ever since Aid had died. She liked to sit there with a cold cup of coffee in front of her, accompanied by only the hum of classical music floating through the house. I grabbed a bagel and I told her that I was staying home from school to work on a project. That was a lie, but it wasn't like she paid any attention to anything I said anymore, as had become typical behavior from her. She just grunted and nodded her head leisurely until I left her alone. The harsh reality was that I could not risk being at school if the police were to turn up. If they did happen to find anything, I had to be there to see it firsthand. And more importantly, I had to be there for my mom. She had absolutely no idea as to the extent of what I had uncovered during the last 2 weeks. And honestly, I didn't have the heart to tell her any of it. I figured that trained law enforcement professionals would do a far better job than I ever could. For the next hour, I locked my bedroom door and I sat on the floor. The bagel was placed to the side. Suddenly I wasn't at all hungry anymore. There was only one thing left to do. I collapsed to my knees and I put my hands together. I had never prayed before. Maybe it was because I had never found myself in a position that required it. But if there was ever a good time to break the tradition, it was now. I didn't know what to say or if I needed to do anything else with my hands, so I just closed my eyes and I whispered what was going through my head as it came to me. For a few precious seconds, I felt totally weightless, like I was floating just above the ground, as I repeated the thoughts that my subconscious was deeming acceptable enough for the man upstairs to hear. Relaxing is the word I think best describes it. I didn't really feel like anybody was listening or cared, but for the first time in over a month, I think I might have been at peace. This feeling was abruptly disrupted by the sound of an angry knocking sound loudly vibrating through the walls. Dream sequence broken. I stood up and I listened. The room was silent and the muffled voices beyond the door were unmistakable. My mom's voice and 4 or 5 others. All men. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she was speaking in very short bursts and the words were more drawn out and reminiscent of actual sentences. I didn't know what to do. I honestly didn't. So I didn't do anything. I just stood there, listening to their muffled voices get closer and closer until there was a single knock on my bedroom door. "Josh, hey buddy, can I have a word?" The voice on the other side said. It sounded calm and authoritative, just as you would imagine a police officer to sound. It took one reply and him giving the handle a firm wiggle for me to realize that I had left it locked. I shuffled to the door, pulled the lock away and opened it to find a tall, physically imposing man in a light blue shirt and black vest looking down at me. A large silver badge in the shape of a star was sewn to the center of his vest and he wore a black hat which covered the majority of his forehead. "Hey pal," he said with a comforting smile. "Can I come in?" After a moment of hesitation, I nodded. The man tipped his hat and he stepped forward. I took a seat at the end of my bed. He smiled. Not that there was anything to smile about. He closed the door behind me, but not before I heard the sound of sniffling coming from the kitchen. "You know you did the right thing. Reporting that conversation," he began. "I know it's not easy to turn something over like that, especially when it belongs to somebody you really care about." "Thanks, but it doesn't matter." I shook my head. He's dead. If he did it, then he did it. I just want this all to be over. I want out of this nightmare, and if this is what takes it, then fine. The man nodded again and started to walk towards my desk. I had completely forgotten that Aid's note was still left on display, but I was at the point where I no longer cared. "What's this then?" the police officer asked calmly. "You like poetry?" His composure was admirable, but I had lived through this nightmare long enough to tell the dried blood around the edges were making him uncomfortable. "It's a note. My brother left it for us when he died. Everybody I've shown it to thinks that it's some kind of confession." "Oh yeah?" He nodded before pausing for a few seconds. "And do you think it's a confession?" I shrugged. "I really wish people would stop asking me that. I don't know, I guess it is." "So the man upstairs, meaning God?" he asked. "Sure, if you'd like." "You don't seem convinced." "Of course I'm not convinced. We're talking about my brother who I knew for 13 years. He never once acted religious." The officer scratched his nose and placed the note back down. "Well, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss, I really am. But what else could it mean? Unless he means old what's-his-face," he said, pointing at the ceiling with a smirk. "He and your brother seemed awfully close." That comment made me feel uncomfortable, and suddenly, the officer's true intentions became clear as day. It was as if Aid's guilt was already a foregone conclusion in his mind, and the whole investigation was just a joke now. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted the case wrapped up and his superiors off his back for good. "Did you even read the conversation between Aid and Mr. Jericho?" I asked bluntly. How can he be the man upstairs if Aid talked to him about it? "Look, kid," he sighed. "Nobody ever wants to accept that a loved one did something horrible, especially not somebody as young as your brother. But how can you explain all the evidence? He confessed to doing something horrible to her, and then doing what he did, and this note. I didn't even know about this note, but this is just the icing on the cake for me. It's his admittance of guilt. He was scared of dying because, well, hell isn't exactly in a preteen's mind. I also wish people would stop calling me kid. I don't really care what you have to say anymore. If you can find proof that my brother did this, then go ahead. His room is right across the hall." I scowled. "I have an officer in there right now. They're all over the apartment, actually. Look, I'm sorry that your brother did this, but what was it that you said in the chat logs? He was ill? He was depressed? Well, yeah, that much is obvious now. He was ill. Mentally very ill, and he killed Lacey Miller because of it. Prove it then. Just know that if it wasn't for me and what's-his-face up there, Lacey Miller's case would still be ice cold." Okay. Leave the police work for us, kid," he said with a sarcastic smile. "Do you even know that Lacey Miller reported a boogeyman being on a roof a few weeks before she was kidnapped? You're saying Aid was the boogeyman as well. Where did you hear that?" The officer's eyes suddenly thinned. "Lacey's mom told me." "Well, that's confidential. And yes, there is nothing to say that that wasn't Aid up on her roof." "Really, officer? He was 13. I wouldn't even be able to climb up on the..." I was slowly beginning to feel confident in Aid's innocence again when we were both interrupted by the sound of a man's scream. I had never heard anything like it before. I had heard people scream before, but not like this. This was chilling. The sound of a man in enormous discomfort and distress. Something was very wrong. The officer turned and leaped out of the room immediately, yelling at me to stay put. For a moment, I accepted his invitation. I stood in shock, my legs shaking as I helplessly listened to the sound of feet pounding against the floor in the hallway. People yelling the same things over and over again. "What? What is that? Get behind me!" As I stood there silently, chilled to the bone about what they had found. I couldn't help but notice something odd about the situation. The scream hadn't come from Aid's room, or any room in the apartment for that matter. They were all running outside. I stood in shock for what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, but by the time I made it into the hallway and ran down the staircase, the apartment was completely empty. I rushed outside to find our communal backyard in a state of disarray and pandemonium. There was a total of 3 police officers stood around the thick cluster of bushes at the far end, and 2 others attempting to restrain my flailing, distraught mother. One officer near the bushes was throwing up all over the flower bed adjacent to it. My mom was just wailing the same thing over and over again, to which nobody was replying. "What is it? What is it? My God, please tell me what it is." Don't go looking for things you don't want to find. This is good advice. Embrace it. Apply it to whatever life decides to throw at you. This is the end of my story. It's a long and uncomfortable end, but I have a feeling you already knew that it was coming. My brother is dead, a little girl went missing, and life is just one big nightmare masquerading as reality. I never saw it, if that's what you're wondering. It was too graphic and inappropriate for my young eyes to see, apparently. I'm sorry I can't go into details, but for mine and your sanity, I think that's probably best for all of us. What I do owe you all for being by my side for so long is to explain everything, from the very beginning to the bitter end. So I will do that now. When I first found the note in Aid's room, I thought that it was a suicide note. Most of you did too. There is even a few of you who suggested that it was referring to God from the very start. I have to say that I can't fault any of you for your ideas and opinions on the note itself, as well as everything else that had happened along the way. You've been incredibly helpful and supportive. I just wish that you had been right. This journey had taken me upstairs. It has taken me to the house of a missing girl, and it ended in my backyard. Yeah, my backyard of all places. Here's what the police found. My mom and I had to verify the entire police report. Officer Thompson was the man in my room. He was tasked with giving me the talk. Essentially, he wanted to keep me in my own room while the search was conducted, as well as trying to manipulate some kind of confession out of me. Yeah, they actually admitted to doing that. As much as I hate the thought of it, they were under immense pressure, and this was the first big lead that they had. Hell, they're human beings trying to survive just like the rest of us, so I'm willing to forgive them for it. There were also 2 officers with my mom and another search in the rooms of Aid and my parents. I've been told that the last officer must remain unnamed. The officer in question was told to search the perimeter, as apparently in many cases, a lot of evidence ends up outside or around the vicinity of the suspect's living quarters. The officer found nothing of interest out on the street, so when he decided to look into the backyard, he assumed it would be an in-and-out job. It was not. This is what he found. Start a police report. Officer Redacted was in charge of searching the outside perimeter of the accused residence. He said the backyard looked completely normal at first instance, slightly unkempt and bland, but it was just a normal backyard with nothing that looked suspicious or out of the ordinary. He quickly surveyed the area and eventually ended up at the far end, where there is a fairly small wooded area. It's not very large, but it's big enough to walk around in. It is inaccessible from the public, and the edges are well hidden from the remainder of the backyard, due to the trees and shrubbery. He said something drew him towards the trees as the wind began to pick up. Officer Redacted is an experienced police officer, and he has been involved in over 175 domestic searches in his career. But he said that he felt somewhat anxious when he first stepped out of the sun into the shadows. He admitted to standing at the central clearing for a few seconds, peering into each corner for a prolonged amount of time. At first instance, he was convinced that there was nothing of any significance in the area. It was only when he attempted to turn around and leave that something caught his eye. He said he did a double take and he said he saw the tip of something poking out of one of the bushes. It was almost camouflaged by the thick, overgrown shrubbery surrounding it, but there was something that seemed to be reflecting from the sun that made Officer Redacted turn around and look at it. When he approached the object, it became clear to Officer Redacted that it was some sort of book or journal, wedged underneath a rock between two bushes. This object would later be described as a scrapbook. The front cover was plain with no lettering or color. The shiny piece that had drawn the attention of Officer Redacted was, in fact, a small plastic padlock, but it had been left unlocked and there was no key in the vicinity. The officer would then proceed to read the first few pages. What he read appeared normal at first, and seemed to be a diary or some kind of note-taking apparatus that belonged to Aid. This was later confirmed by his family. With the knowledge that the scrapbook belonged to Aid, the officer put it under his arm and planned to return back to the apartment to hand it over to the commanding officer, Officer Johnson, who was still inside. However, his departure was prematurely interrupted by a subtle creaking sound beneath his feet as he prepared to leave. He also noticed an extremely gradual incline beneath him. Officer Redacted paused and took a step back, before assuming the same position and confirmed that he had stepped on a patch of flimsy and uneven land. The ground was muddy and leafy, but after kicking at the uneven patch for a few seconds, the officer noticed that he wasn't actually standing above earth anymore. Instead, he was standing over what felt like a wooden surface. He kicked at the irregular patch for up to 10-15 seconds until the excess earth and leaves cleared to reveal a medium-sized wooden door just a few inches below ground level. The officer then began to get down on his hands and knees and claw at the remnants of soil and weeds to fully unearth it and reveal it as some form of trapdoor. There was no lock attached to it. When the officer lifted the door, the first thing he noticed was the smell coming from beneath. He would later describe it as rancid, offensive, and the worst thing he had ever smelled. He was surprised that he hadn't gotten sick on the spot. Feeling physically ill and unprepared for what he might find below, the officer peered down into the hole, and while the natural lighting helped visibility slightly, he could not see anything visually. What he could see was what seemed to be a ladder made from rope leading down into the darkness. On the verge of physical sickness, but possibly spurred on by adrenaline, the officer grabbed hold of the ladder and began to descend. He described the descent as lasting around 6 seconds before his feet finally touched the ground. By this time, the smell was soul-destroying and he couldn't stop himself from violently vomiting. After taking 30 seconds to finally catch his breath and compose himself, the officer then grabbed his flashlight and switched it on, shining the light all around him. What he would go on to see has psychologically damaged the officer, to the point where he has been assigned a personal therapist who is treating him for PTSD and severe anxiety. The following is his initial description of the environment. It was dark, really, really dark in the smell. The smell was foul and horrific, and I was sick as soon as I touched down. When I finally did manage to shine my flashlight, I could not believe what I was seeing. I thought that my eyes might be playing tricks on me, and that maybe I was hallucinating, or that I was deprived of oxygen or something stupid. I just couldn't fathom anything. It didn't even seem like real life anymore. There were these kids, these dead kids laying all around me, staring back at me like pale, lifeless rag dolls. Everywhere I pointed the flashlight, a new face would appear out of nowhere. Every corner of the room, a new pair of wide-open, pupilless eyes gazed back in my direction. It was as if they were begging for me to help from beyond the grave. When I moved a few feet closer to one of the bodies nearest to me, I saw rodents crawling all over it, feeding on the body like a dog would with its favorite chew toy. I couldn't stomach it. The smell was getting worse and worse as the seconds ticked along, and suddenly, the only sound I could hear was the sound of vermin's teeth gnawing away at dried flesh and decaying bones. I fled. I jumped back on the ladder and I climbed for what felt like forever. I couldn't feel my feet or my fingers, but I just kept climbing. I desperately needed fresh air, or I was going to pass out. When I finally reached the top, I just screamed. I didn't know what else to do. I just screamed until somebody came to help me. Officer Redacted would later be accompanied by 4 other officers, including squad leader Officer Johnson and Deputy Officer Thompson. After a brief conversation between Officer Redacted and Officer Johnson, the whole area was quickly sealed off as an official crime scene. At first instance, the on-duty officers were unsure of what they were dealing with. Officer Redacted was in a state of shock and continued to projectile vomit in and around the surrounding area. Officer Johnson and Officer Thompson then discovered the wooden door facing upwards, themselves seemingly confirming Officer Redacted's story. Although impossible to confirm, it is now believed that the underground area Officer Redacted stumbled upon was an old fallout shelter that most likely dated back to periods of the Cold War. It is unclear how many fallout shelters continue to exist in Chicago, especially in as good shape as this one. But with this unexpected discovery, it is possible that there are more than recently projected. As for the children found in the shelter, formal identification is still ongoing. One body is firmly believed to be that of Lacey Miller, a 6-year-old girl who went missing from her home a few months prior, and the others are still yet to be confirmed. Families of missing children in the southern Chicago area are currently being issued permission to make formal identification, though none of them seem to match any initial descriptions of those currently listed as missing. Because of the clothing items mostly still in moderate condition, there are signs that point to most of the others being possible street children. Their ages range from anywhere between approximately 10 and 19 of varying genders. There are 9 deceased persons in total. The scrapbook recovered at the scene was eventually taken into evidence and scanned word for word. The events described in the scrapbook paint a picture of betrayal, violence, and raw, unprecedented horror. The author, Aid Redacted, was 13 at the time of writing and is since deceased through a self-inflicted wound. A few of the entries deemed important and relevant to the investigation are listed below. December 23rd, 2018. It's almost midnight and it's almost Christmas Eve, but I can't feel excited because I did something foolish and terrible. I don't know why I did it, but I do stupid things sometimes. I would do anything to take it back, but I can't. So I'm just going to write it down here. I'm just hoping that I can remember it all. Today I went down to the trees. When we were really young, Josh and I used to go down there all the time and play in the bushes, and build forts out of sticks, and I guess I wanted to build him something and surprise him for Christmas. But when I got there, I saw something that I wasn't expecting to see. Well, it wasn't just somebody. It was my dad. I was confused because I could have sworn that he had already left for work, and I had never seen him down here before. I was gonna ask him what he was doing, but I decided not to because he looked really angry, like he does when he drinks a lot of beer. So I hid behind a tree and I just watched him. I was planning on waiting until he left. I couldn't understand what he was doing. It looked like he was digging. He was ripping and tearing at the ground like a savage animal, until he pulled this door out of the ground and he disappeared through it. I didn't know what I was watching. He ended up spending quite a long time down there as well, but I didn't want to confront him because, like I said, he looked really angry. After a while, he appeared again. He still looked really angry as he climbed out and he slammed the door shut. And then he got on his knees and he pushed a load of dirt and leaves across it before he looked around and he walked back towards the house. This is where I made a huge mistake. I looked. I went to the door, I pushed the dirt away, and I opened the door. It smelled like death, but for some reason, I went anyway because I'm an idiot. My phone's flashlight guided me into some sort of chamber I never even knew existed. Why did I go down there? I don't know, but I did, and what I saw is gonna ruin my life. It's gonna ruin my brother's life, and it's gonna ruin my mom's life. It's gonna tear our family apart. And it's all my fault because I looked. I can't even say what I saw because I feel sick just thinking about it, but it's all there. There are dead kids down there, and there are lots of them. I even recognize one of them. She goes to my drama club and she's much younger than me. She didn't deserve to die. None of them did, but they're all dead. They're all dead and I don't know why. I had to get out of there as quickly as possible, but I panicked. I was worried that maybe I was imagining it all, so I ran to the nearest body and I touched it. Her face was so cold and there was blood all over her clothes. It looked like there was something tucked in her hand, so I grabbed it. I don't know why. I was scared and I needed evidence of what I saw. Anyway, I climbed out. I was crying because I was sure somebody was going to see me coming out, and I was right. My dad stood a few feet away. I had just climbed out, shut the door, and he was there waiting for me next to a tree. His eyes were wide and angry, and for some reason, his eyes looked bloodshot as he opened his mouth and he walked towards me. I just stood there. That's when he grabbed my collar and he pinned me against the tree. He told me that I found his little secret. He said that nobody must ever know. If I told absolutely anybody, he would kill me, Josh, and my mom in an instant. He asked me if I wanted to end up with the kids underground. I said no. I'm so scared and I don't know what to do. December 24th, 2018. It's just gone midnight and I spent the whole day in my room. I can't sleep. I've always been scared of my dad, but now I'm terrified of him. I still don't believe that my dad is capable of something like this. But I keep reading the note I found on there and it's real. It's all real. And everything I saw actually happened. The night is long and the day's longer. Footsteps. So many footsteps. Unaware of the torture. I can't bear it. I am so scared. Of the man upstairs. That's what it says. All those kids down there, they were terrified of him. Terrified of the man that I call Dad. I just can't get over how he acted earlier. It looked like him and it spoke like him, but it just didn't feel like my dad. He seemed crazier, angrier. I've seen him at his most violent, drunken form and this just felt different. I don't know what to think though. I think I'm going crazy. I want to tell my brother everything, but I feel like my dad is listening to everything that passes through my mind. Even my deepest thoughts. It's like he's gotten inside of me. Like right now. I think I can hear somebody grunting outside of my door. Entries from December 2018 until February 2019 were updated every day, in which the author made reference to on multiple occasions. The strange behavior of the suspect and how often he acted like absolutely nothing was wrong, while also appearing in his bedroom, usually late at night, to remind the author to keep their mouths shut to risk everybody they love dying. What he had witnessed, along with the behavior of the suspect and threats directed at him, continued to drive the author into an even greater state of psychosis. The author continuously comments on how the suspect almost has a dual identity, acting like one person during the day and another when he visited him at night. The author also constantly reminds readers that he wants to tell somebody about everything that he knows, but he can't risk the suspect knowing, stating that there is something wrong with him, something different about him. The author is clear that he thinks that the suspect can hear his thoughts and that he means exactly what he says. His life became a living nightmare because of it. The suspect was promptly arrested after the scrapbook was read by law enforcement. The suspect insists that he is innocent and knew absolutely nothing about a fallout shelter at the bottom of the yard. The suspect also claims that they have a concrete alibi for the night that Lacey Miller was taken, and there is no forensic evidence to suggest that he was ever even on the premises of the Miller household, let alone on the roof. He insists that he had never seen any of the deceased persons before. Despite his pleas, he will stand trial next year. The bodies of the deceased have been removed from the fallout shelter and government officials will soon begin the process of filling it in for good. Mr. Morgan Jericho, who lived directly above the author and suspect, was initially charged with perverting the course of justice, but the charges have since been dropped on moral grounds. The note that the author found underground was kept in safe hands by the author's older brother for weeks after his death and is currently serving as key evidence in this case against the suspect. As well as the note, the final extract ever written by the author is deemed of great importance by lawyers for the state. It is attached below. February 13th, 2019. To my brother Josh. Wednesday is my least favorite day, so it only makes sense that I die today. I guess this is a suicide note, but I can't write what I really want to because it will put the people I love in danger. So, I'm gonna leave this scrapbook in the trees where we used to build forts. Josh, I'm sure you'll find it because you're smart and mentally strong, much more than I am. I'm a coward. I've been broken by somebody that I thought I trusted. I don't think I can ever tell you what I've been through since Christmas. All I know is that he scares me. He scares me more than you could ever imagine. Do I really deserve to be scared? I don't think so. Not when I compare myself to what the people in that chamber went through. Those people earned every right to be scared. I'm just ashamed of myself. So it's finally time to go. I can no longer live with myself for the hell that I go through every day. I'm sorry. I'm surprised I lasted this long. We actually learned about reincarnation in class last year. Apparently some people really believe in it. I don't know, it just kinda seems silly to me. But maybe it is real. Maybe one of those kids can come back instead of me. That would be nice. It might sound funny to you, but that note I found in the middle of that chamber has meant a lot to me since I found it. I look at it every night before he comes into my room and stares at me for hours. Not because of what it says, but because some of it rhymes. And we both know how much kids like to rhyme. I know it's unlikely, but I hope some of them found at least a little small amount of happiness when they wrote it. Probably not, but I've been holding on to that hope. You should too. Love you. End of police report.